The phone rang on the wrong end of the city, and Mara Delgado answered it, with her back pressed to the bathroom wall. The tile cold through her shirt, her right hand braced against the door she had locked 12 minutes ago, when she heard Tito's key scratch the deadbolt on the front door of her apartment. She had not called the police. She had already called them twice that year, once in March when he put her through the kitchen screen door, and once in June when he waited for her outside the translation firm on Kamuning Road for 2 hours. And both times the officer who came had known his name and shaken his hand before writing anything down. She had not called her sister Lena, because Lena was in Davao, and there was nothing she could do from that distance except be frightened. She had meant to call the building's front desk and ask someone, anyone, to come upstairs and knock on the door so that the sound of another person would move Tito away from it. She had dialed the building code and then 3 other digits in the wrong sequence because her hands were shaking, and the light over the sink was flickering, and the way it had flickered for 2 weeks, and she had not been able to get the landlord to fix it. What she reached instead was a man whose voice, when it came through the small speaker, was level in a way she had not heard from any man in her recent memory. Not loud, not startled, just level and waiting. She said, "I'm sorry. I think I have the wrong number." There was a pause, not the pause of someone who did not know what to say. The pause of someone making a decision that he had already finished making before the pause ended. He said, "How can I help you?" It was not a question the way he said it. The grammar was a question. The register was something else, something she could not name while she was still listening for the movement on the other side of the bathroom door. She hung up. She sat on the floor of the bathroom until the front door of the apartment opened, and then closed again. And she heard Tito's footsteps moving back down the hall toward the stairs. She stayed there for another 20 minutes to be sure. When she finally came out, she found 3 of her potted plants knocked over by the window, the soil across the sill, but nothing else disturbed. He had not wanted anything tonight, except for her to know he could get in. She poured herself a glass of water and stood at the kitchen counter and thought about the voice on the phone. Mara had been a freelance translator for 6 years, working across Tagalog, Spanish, and Mandarin, with enough legal and medical register to keep her calendar full through word of mouth and 3 agency contracts. She worked from the 6th floor apartment on Quezon Avenue that she paid for herself on a second-hand laptop, with reference books sorted on a plywood shelf above the radiator. The work required her to read the exact weight of a word in one language and find its structural equivalent in another, which meant she was careful with language in a way most people were not. The pause before she chose a phrase, the attention to what was meant versus what was said. She had met Tito 4 years earlier, when he was charming and she was lonely. And she had understood something was wrong with the situation approximately 18 months before she had understood what to do about it. By the time she had understood what to do about it, she was dealing with someone who had contacts in the local precinct and enough cash on hand to make small problems disappear before they became documented. She was also dealing, though she did not know this yet, with a man who owed a $40,000 debt to someone he had never introduced her to. The next morning, she received a message on the same phone number she had misdialed from a contact, listed only as an initial. The message said that someone would be by her building that evening to discuss a matter related to her safety. It said the visitor's name was Dante Reyes, and that she was under no obligation to answer the door. It said she could verify the name with her building's front desk because Dante would check in there first. She stood at the kitchen counter and read the message 3 times. The 3rd time she read it, she noticed that the message had not asked her a single question and had not told her anything would be fixed. It had provided 1 name, 1 piece of verifiable information, and 1 exit option. She checked with the front desk at 4 in the afternoon. Dante had already checked in. He was taller than the intercom made him sound, in a gray jacket that was too well cut for the hallway of her building, with a manner that was formal in the old-fashioned sense, courteous in the specific way of someone who has been told exactly how to speak to a particular person. He did not come inside her apartment. He stood in the hallway and told her that a matter had come to his employer's attention that required a brief conversation with a Mr. Tito Cruz, and that this conversation would take place outside her building at approximately 8 o'clock that evening, and that she might want to be elsewhere during that time. She asked whose employer. Dante said, "His name is Benjamin Santos. He asks that you not be concerned." She was concerned, but not in the way she might have expected. She was concerned the way she was concerned when a translation came in with a term she had never seen, and she could not immediately locate its register, not frightened exactly, but attentive, her mind already cataloging what she knew and what she did not. At 8 o'clock, she was at the corner pharmacy 2 blocks down, buying ibuprofen she did not need. At 8:15, she walked back. Tito was standing in the building's small forecourt with Dante on one side and a second man she did not know on the other, and a third man leaning against a dark sedan at the curb with the kind of posture that communicated he was not there to drive. Dante was speaking to Tito in a low voice. Whatever he was saying had taken the blood out of Tito's face. She watched Tito nod twice and then once more, slowly, the way he nodded when he was agreeing to something that frightened him considerably more than she ever had. She had watched Tito perform confidence in front of every other person in her life. Watching him perform compliance for strangers was its own specific education. Dante looked up and found her on the sidewalk and gave her a small, correct nod. She nodded back. She went upstairs. She did not see Tito again. 2 days later, Dante came back and told her that her employer, Benjamin Santos, had arranged a temporary apartment on Katipunan Avenue that she was welcome to use for as long as she needed while her own lease situation was reviewed. He said the lease was not her concern and that her name and her name alone was on the new documents. He said there was a set of keys on the kitchen counter and that the refrigerator was stocked. She refused. She said she had work she could do from her own apartment, and her books were there, and she did not accept living arrangements from men she had not met. Dante absorbed this without visible reaction. He said she was entirely correct, and that she was welcome to stay where she was. He said he would leave the keys on her counter anyway. He said he would have someone check in with her building security rotation. She watched him go, and then stood in her doorway for a long moment. The keys were on her counter when she turned back. She had not heard him put them there. She lasted 4 more nights in her own apartment. On the 4th night, someone put a photograph through her mail slot. It was a photo of her at the pharmacy, taken at 8:12 on the night Tito was spoken to. She didn't recognize the angle. It had been taken from above. She packed a bag that night and took the keys to Katipunan. The apartment there had south-facing windows and a kitchen that had been stocked by someone who had paid attention. There were reference books on the shelf over the desk, still in their store wrapping. There was a set of basics in her approximate size folded on the bed. There was a French press on the counter and the right kind of beans beside it, which was a specific enough detail that she stopped and stood in the kitchen for a moment, looking at it. She told herself 48 hours. She had her laptop. She had a contract due in 3 days, a 12-page legal brief from Spanish to Tagalog for a land rights firm in Cebu. She could do it from anywhere. The 48 hours passed. She requested a 2-day extension from the firm and stayed. She found her rhythm. Morning at the desk, afternoon coffee, evening calls with Lena, who was relieved in a way that came through the phone clearly and did not ask too many questions. Lena said, "You sound better. Your voice is different." Mara said she was fine. She was not ready to explain what fine had cost. Dante came every second day, not to check on her, but to resolve logistics, he said, which meant he arrived with new building access credentials, with a slip of paper noting a direct number for a medical clinic 2 streets over, with a quiet word about the car service available at the ground floor if she needed it. Each visit lasted under 10 minutes. He treated her schedule with the courtesy of someone who had been told her schedule was her own. On the 8th day, Benjamin Santos came. She heard the knock at 10:15 on a Tuesday morning, and she opened the door expecting Dante. She registered height first, then a gray suit worn without effort, then a face that was carefully contained in the way of someone who had practiced containment for a long time. He was not young, but he was not old either. He carried nothing. He did not lean against the door frame. He said, "Mara." She had given Dante her name. She had not expected it to sound like that. She asked him in. She did not offer coffee because she did not want to perform hostess in an apartment she was still not sure was a kindness or a structure, and he seemed to understand this because he sat in the chair at the desk rather than on the sofa, leaving her the sofa across the room, keeping the distance respectful and unclosed. He asked about the translation firm. He asked if the books were the right ones. He said she was under no obligation to stay. She said, "I know that." He looked at her in a way that suggested he had been watching for her to say exactly that. And something behind his expression shifted a fraction, a loosening she would not have caught if she had not been trained to look for the space between what was said and what was meant. She said, "Why did you answer the phone?" He said, "I answer my own calls." She waited. He did not add anything. She had been in enough rooms with men who would have filled that silence with their own importance to notice that he did not. He left at 11:15. The apartment held his presence for a few minutes in the way rooms do, a certain quality of the air not yet settled back to ordinary. She sat at the desk and did not open her laptop for a while. If there is a line in any of this that was the center of it, it was not the misdial, and it was not Dante's first visit. It was that pause in her apartment after he left, when she held the space of a man who had arranged her safety through a series of named practical decisions and had then made no claim on it whatsoever. You can stay with this moment if you like, or subscribe and let the story carry you through. Because what comes next changes the shape of everything that preceded it. 3 days later, Dante came with the information. He sat across from her at the kitchen table, which was the first time he had not remained standing. And he told her that her former partner had been carrying a debt with his employer that had gone unpaid for 11 months. $40,000. The nature of the debt was not something he could detail, but its size and its age were matters of record. The debt had been a condition of a working relationship that Tito had ended badly, and the working relationship had involved routes and schedules that his employer had trusted to Tito's discretion. She understood, from the careful way Dante was choosing his words, that they were not talking about money that had been borrowed. They were talking about money that had been moved. She said, "And I'm connected to this debt how?" Dante said, "You shared a household address with Mr. Cruz for 14 months. She felt the floor of the situation shift under her, not because she was afraid, because she understood now that her call to Benjamin's phone had not been as accidental as she had believed. The phone number was in Tito's contacts. Tito's seized phone contacts, Dante said carefully, from a check conducted after a conversation with one of his employer's financial people, showed Benjamin's direct line stored under a maintenance code. She had misdialed into a number her ex-boyfriend had been keeping and had never told her about, Dante said. "My employer wants you to understand that the debt is not yours. You were not a party to its creation. He is not collecting on your behalf. She sat with that for a moment. Then she said, "Then what am I?" Dante said he would let his employer answer that. He left the slip of paper with Benjamin's direct number on the kitchen table beside her coffee mug and was gone before she had finished reading it. She called the number that evening. Benjamin answered after 2 rings. She told him she understood about the debt. She told him she did not know what she was supposed to feel about it. She waited. He said, "You don't owe me anything. I want to be clear about that." She said, "And yet here I am in your apartment." There was a brief quiet on the line that she recognized as amusement, or its precise, controlled cousin. He said the apartment was hers for as long as she wanted it. He said the debt had been resolved through other means, and she was not a piece of it. She asked how it had been resolved. He said, "Tito made other arrangements." She did not ask what that meant. She understood the register. Lena called the next morning. She called every other day as a matter of habit, the way sisters who have been each other's only reliable constant tend to do. But this call ran long, an hour and 20 minutes, because Mara told her most of it. Not all of it, not the organized crime portion, but the outline, the misdeal, the man on the phone, the apartment, the coffee beans. Lena said, he knew what kind of beans. Mara said, he knew what kind of beans. There was a silence on Lena's end that contained everything Lena was too careful to say directly. Then she said, "Are you going to Lisbon?" Mara had received the Lisbon contract 3 weeks earlier. 14 days, a legal symposium on international trade arbitration, 9 simultaneous sessions across Spanish and Mandarin, a fee that would carry her through the rest of the year. She had not mentioned it to Benjamin, and she had not mentioned it to Dante. She had mentioned it to Lena in a prior call, and had said she was not sure she would accept it. She was sure now. She booked the flight the following Tuesday morning, a direct service leaving Ninoy Aquino International Airport at 11 at night, arriving in Lisbon after a connection in Dubai, landing on a Thursday morning in early November. She sent the contract confirmation to the symposium coordinator. She sent a brief message to Dante saying she would be out of the country for 2 weeks on a work engagement, and that she had no concerns about her security during the trip. Dante responded in 11 minutes. He said he understood, and that he hoped the work went well, and that he was leaving a small item with the building's front desk for her to take if she liked. She picked it up on her way out to a final pharmacy run. It was a paper bag from the building desk attendant, folded twice. Inside the bag was a phone, a basic model, nothing sophisticated, wrapped in a small square of notepaper. The note was in Dante's handwriting, which she recognized from the slip with the phone number. It said the phone had 1 contact saved. It said she should keep it in her carry-on. She stood in the building lobby with the bag in her hand. She thought about leaving it at the desk. She thought about it for long enough to establish that she was genuinely considering it. And then she put it in the inner pocket of her carry-on. The Symposium's hotel in Lisbon was on the edge of the Chiado district. 8 floors, cream-colored stone and tall windows. The kind of place that smelled of floor wax and fresh linen and the particular quiet of a building that had been well maintained for a long time. The coordinator met her in the lobby on Thursday morning and walked her through the schedule. Her room was on the 5th floor. She unpacked her reference books and her good headphones and set them on the desk and stood at the window for a while, looking at the street below, the tram lines and the low November light, and felt the particular quality of being in a new city where no one knew her name. She found the note slipped under her door 2 hours later. It was from the hotel concierge, handwritten, saying that a guest on the same floor had left a contact card for her in case she needed local recommendations. The contact card was cream-colored, heavier stock than her translation firm used, with a name she recognized printed in plain font, No title, no organization. Just Benjamin Santos, and a room number 12 doors down the hall. She sat on the edge of the bed with the card in her hand for a while. She went down to the hotel's small bar, which opened onto an interior courtyard, and she ordered tea and sat with it until she had decided what she felt. It was not anger exactly. She had left without telling him because she had needed to know she could. She had needed the Lisbon flight to be something she chose herself, not something arranged. And she had needed to land on that 5th floor and stand at that window and feel the size of a city, where she was simply a translator with a good contract and a set of reference books. She had needed that hour before the note arrived. After a second cup of tea, she sent a message to the card's number. She said, "Prior plans." He replied, "Prior plans." She did not laugh. She came close to it. She met him in the courtyard before dinner. He was in a different suit, charcoal rather than gray, and he was already sitting when she arrived, which she noted as a courtesy. He had a small coffee in front of him and a document folder on the table that he closed when she sat down and moved to one side. The courtyard had a small fountain, and the November air was cool and dry, and the light at that hour was copper-colored off the old stone. He said he was there on organizational business that had been scheduled for 6 weeks. He said his contact in Lisbon operated out of the Alfama district, and the meetings were set to run through the weekend. She said, "And how long has your organizational business in Lisbon been connected to a foreign broker named Vasquez?" She watched his face register the question. Not surprise, not quite. A reassessment of something. He said, "Where did you hear that name?" She said she had translated a legal brief for a trade symposium 6 months earlier that had involved arbitration documents from a Lisbon-based intermediary. She said the name had appeared in footnotes 3 times, and that she had filed it in the way she filed all names that passed through her hands, without meaning to attach any significance to it until this moment. He did not say anything for a moment. Then he said, "Vasquez is not a reason to cancel your contract. But I want you to stay on the hotel floors you have clearance for and not to take meetings outside the hotel building without telling Dante." She said, "Dante is not here." He said, "He will be tomorrow morning." She agreed. She did not feel managed. She felt the specific quality of being told a piece of the picture by someone who had decided she had earned it. Dante arrived on Friday morning, as promised, and walked her through the symposium schedule with the same procedural courtesy he had shown her in Manila. As if cross-referencing her translation sessions against a security protocol was a perfectly ordinary way to spend a morning. She had 8 sessions on Friday, and he attended the building without attending the sessions themselves. She translated 640 lines of Spanish arbitration language and 50 minutes of Mandarin testimony, and came down to the lobby at 6 in the evening with a headache behind her left eye and the particular tiredness of a day spent inside someone else's words. Dante was waiting in the lobby. He said the evening was clear and there was a restaurant 2 streets down that his employer had recommended, and that she was entirely welcome to eat in her room if she preferred. She chose the restaurant. Benjamin did not join them. She ate fish and bread and talked with Dante about Lisbon more than she had expected to, and discovered that he had been here 4 times before and knew which bakeries opened early. On Saturday morning, the symposium ran a half day, and she came back to the hotel through the side entrance from the cobbled alley the coordinator used for the participant shuttles. She was thinking about a phrase she had needed to render from Mandarin into Spanish, a term from international trade law for which neither language had a truly clean equivalent. And she was still working through the problem when the 2 men stepped out of the service alcove near the fire door. They were professional about it. One of them spoke to her in Portuguese, and the other had his hand at the small of her back before she had finished processing what the first one had said. The hallway was narrow, and the service entrance had brought her in at a point where the camera coverage had a gap she had not noticed on her first walk-through. She did not scream. She had been in small space situations before, and she had learned, not as a lesson, but as a bodily fact, that screaming in a hallway required someone nearby who would respond to it. She reached into her carry-on. Her hand found the paper bag by the feel of it before her fingers located the phone inside. And she pulled it clear and hit the only saved contact without looking at the screen, because she was looking at the man in front of her who was reaching for the bag itself. She held the bag by its strap and brought her elbow up and hit him with it, which was not elegant but connected. And the phone was already ringing by the time the second man had his arm around her shoulders, and Benjamin answered on the second ring. She said, "Service corridor, side entrance, hotel." She said it the way she had been trained to render information. Precise, the minimum necessary, nothing wasted. Then the man with the arm around her took the phone, and the two of them walked her out the fire door and into the alley. She spent the next 22 minutes in the back of a car with her wrists zip-tied and a cloth over her eyes. Would she used to do what she had always done under pressure? Catalog. She cataloged the sound of the engine, the number of turns, the grade of the road surface under the tires, the voices of the two men in the front who spoke in Portuguese with one another, and said her name once in a way that confirmed they had been given a specific description of her. She cataloged the smell of the interior, machine oil and something citrus from an air freshener. She cataloged the length of the drive. She counted in her head and arrived at approximately 14 minutes. The building they brought her into was warehouse scale, which she could tell from the echo of the floor under her feet before they took the cloth off. The ceiling was high. There was a single pendant lamp over the center of the space, and she blinked in its light and adjusted. There were 4 men in the room besides the 2 who had brought her. A man seated in a folding chair at the center of the lighted space was older, well-dressed in a way that read as deliberate, a pale linen jacket and a dark shirt beneath it. He had the kind of unhurried manner of someone who expected to be waited for. He said, in accented but careful English, that she was not in any danger as long as her presence communicated what it needed to communicate to her associate. She said, "I'm a translator. I don't have an associate." He looked at her the way people look at someone they believe is performing a specific role badly. He said, "Mara Delgado, you arrived with Dante Reyes. You sat in the courtyard with Benjamin Santos for 30 minutes on Thursday evening." She said, "I sat with a hotel guest in a shared courtyard. That's not an association." He smiled at this the way someone smiles when they have decided the argument is over rather than when they have won it. She heard the door behind her. She did not look around. She had learned not to give the room the satisfaction of seeing her startle. But she registered the change in the room's energy the way you register a weather change. A shift in pressure that the men around her felt in their bodies before any of them reached for anything. The man with the linen jacket sat forward very slightly, which was the first deviation from his controlled manner. And then he sat back again, as if he had decided not to give himself away. It was already too late for that. Benjamin said, from somewhere behind her and then beside her as he moved through the room, "Vasquez." Not loud. The floor of the room carried it. She counted the men she had not seen on her way in. 2 more by the far wall, now standing differently. Dante in the doorway she had come through. A 3rd man at the loading door on the far side of the space, who had not been visible until Dante's arrival made him visible. The man called Vasquez said, "Mr. Santos, I apologize for the venue." Benjamin said, "I don't think you do." He crossed to where she was standing and took a small folding knife from his jacket pocket and cut the zip tie at her wrists without looking away from Vasquez and without touching her skin. She felt the give of the plastic and flexed her hands and kept her breathing regulated. He said to her, "Move to the door, please." She moved. She did not run. She walked in the way she had walked into every difficult situation her work had produced, steadily and with her head at its normal angle. Dante was at the door, and he let her through. And then he was not behind her, because he had stepped back into the room. She stood in the outer corridor and listened. What she heard was Benjamin's voice continuing for approximately 4 minutes at the same level tone, which grew quieter rather than louder as it continued. And then Vasquez's voice, which had been professional and accented and confident when she was in the room, grew shorter and then shorter still, and then stopped being confident in any register she could identify. She heard the sound of furniture moving once, a single clean sound, not extended. She heard Dante's voice for exactly 1 sentence. After that, she heard nothing that required her to understand what was happening. When Benjamin came through the door, his jacket was still on, and his hands were clean. He looked at her wrists. He said, "Are you hurt?" She said, "No." He said, "The car is outside." She said, "Vasquez." He said, Vasquez understood what his position was, going forward, and what the cost of not understanding it would be. He paused. His operation in Lisbon will not continue. She filed that under rendered permanent, as she filed all irreversible outcomes. Then she said, "I hit the first one with my elbow." Something behind his eyes shifted, and she recognized the register from the apartment on Katipunan Avenue, the precise, controlled cousin of amusement. He said, "I know." Dante had the corridor on his phone. She said, "He had the corridor on his phone." He said, "He had the corridor on his phone from the moment you came through the side entrance this morning." She stood with that for a moment. She thought about the bag Dante had handed her at the building desk in Manila. She thought about the note in his handwriting. She thought about 48 hours that had extended into 3 weeks, and a French press on a kitchen counter, and a set of reference books still in their store wrapping. She thought about a direct number stored under a maintenance code in the phone of a man who had spent 4 years making himself the only danger in her world, and what it meant that the number had rung where it did. She said, "You're going to have to explain the whole structure of this to me at some point." He said, "Yes." He held the door to the outer stairwell. She went through it. She was not performing steadiness anymore. She was simply steady, in the way of a person who has stopped waiting to be terrified and started being present in the room. The drive back to the hotel took 11 minutes. Dante drove. She sat in the back beside Benjamin, and the city moved past the windows, the narrow white streets of the Alfama, the lit river visible between buildings, the copper and black of Lisbon at night. She said nothing. He said nothing. The silence between them was the particular kind that is not empty. At the hotel, Dante came in to speak with the front desk while she and Benjamin crossed the lobby. The desk attendant looked up and said her name without being reminded of it, and said good evening, and told them both that her breakfast request for Saturday had been confirmed. The desk attendant had not been given her name by Mara. He had been given it by someone who had ensured that this hotel, this corridor, this lobby knew who she was before she arrived. She had understood this intellectually from the first day. Standing in the lobby at 10 in the evening with her hands clean and her wrists freed, she understood it differently. In the elevator, Benjamin said, "I want you to stay through your contract." She said, "I was planning to." He said, "Good." She said, "And after the contract." There was a brief pause. Then he said, "There is a discussion we have not had." She said, "We can have it." He said, "Not tonight." Tonight, you should rest." The elevator reached the 5th floor. She stepped out and he remained in it, because his room was 12 doors down and they had approached the evening from different positions, and whatever came next was going to require her to have slept first. She understood the courtesy of this without needing to name it. She stood in the doorway of her room. He held the elevator door from the inside with one hand. He said, "You called the number." She said, "I called the number." He said, "You could have put the phone in a drawer." She said, "I thought about it." The elevator door tried to close. He let it. She watched him go down the corridor toward room 12 doors down, his pace the same as it always was, unhurried and without any performance of being watched. She went inside and washed her face and sat on the edge of the bed and did not sleep for another hour. But the hour was not frightening. She sat with what she knew, which was that she had crossed into Lisbon alone and had walked out of a warehouse under her own feet and had taken the elevator to her floor and was sitting in a room that was hers, and that the world outside the window was still the same world it had always been, and that she was no longer in it the same way. She finished her contract in 14 days. On the last morning, a Saturday, she had her coffee at the courtyard table with the fountain making its small sound beside her. Benjamin joined her. He brought a second coffee he had not asked permission to bring and set it across from her and sat. And they talked for 2 hours in the particular way of people who have been reading each other carefully in a series of charged silences and are finally using sentences. He told her enough about the structure, not all of it. Enough. She asked questions the way she constructed translations, precisely and without filler, and he answered them the same way, which was the first time she had spoken at length with someone who matched her register exactly. She told him about Lena. She told him about the translation work and what she liked about it and why she had never wanted to work in an office. She told him she had been trying for 3 years to get a contract with a maritime law firm in Singapore that would keep her in work across 2 languages she was strongest in, and that she had submitted the proposal twice and been declined twice. He did not say he could arrange it. He said, "Submit it again." He said it the way he said everything, level and certain, as if the information about the 3rd submission had simply not reached the right desk yet. She flew back to Manila with a carry-on and her reference books and the basic phone in the inner pocket, which she had not left in the hotel drawer. Lena came to the new apartment 3 weeks later, on a Saturday afternoon, with a bag of pain de sal from the bakery on the corner of their mother's old street. She had taken the early flight from Davao and was warm from the cab and slightly windswept and immediately at home, in a way that only sisters from the same house know how to be. Moving through the kitchen and touching things and noting the French press and the south-facing windows with a series of small, appreciative sounds. Mara had set the table with the good coffee and 2 cups and a cutting board for the bread. And she had opened the balcony door because the morning was clear and the city below was doing what it always did, moving and making noise, and being entirely indifferent to the small, warm kitchen above it. They talked for most of the morning. Lena asked about Lisbon, and Mara told her the parts she had decided to tell, including the side entrance and the corridor and the zip tie and what she had done with her elbow, because Lena deserved the full account of the parts that concerned her sister's survival. Lena listened without interrupting, which was not her natural register. So Mara understood it as the quality of attention she was given. When she had finished, Lena said, "The phone is still in your carry-on." Mara said, "It's still in my carry-on." Lena looked at her the way she had looked at her their entire lives when she wanted to say something Mara already knew. Then she looked at the French press and the reference books and the south-facing windows and the cutting board with the bakery bread. And she did not say anything else. She did not need to. A little after noon, the buzzer sounded. Lena looked at Mara. Mara was already crossing to the door. She opened it without checking the peephole. Dante was in the hall with a small plant in a terracotta pot, a trailing green thing, and a brief note folded over its soil. He said good afternoon and handed the plant to her, and said his employer had asked him to deliver it. He said the note explained the watering schedule. He said the variety apparently did well in south-facing light. She took the plant. She said, "Tell him I said thank you." Dante said he would. He looked at her once in the way of someone who has watched something from its beginning and has arrived at a place he was reasonably confident they would reach. And then he was gone. Lena appeared in the kitchen doorway. She looked at the plant. She looked at the note. She said, "He sent you a plant with a watering schedule." Mara set it on the windowsill in the south-facing light. She unfolded the note. The handwriting was not Dante's. It was different. The same careful hand she had seen on no document, only inferred from the choice of coffee beans and the reference book still in their wrapping and a room 12 doors down a Lisbon corridor. The note said, "The symposium coordinator in Singapore has been in contact. Your proposal reached the right desk." She stood at the window with the note in one hand, and the city below going about its ordinary business and the plant on the sill in its terracotta pot. And the door behind her was still open. She had not flinched when she opened it.